Hi, everyone. We are going to get started in like 1.5 seconds, or 1.5 minutes, actually, not seconds. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this panel. I know attendees are trickling in and you guys will continue to trickle in. For those who don't know, my name is Shone Adebagbo. I am a rising second year and I've been for the last couple of weeks and we will continue going throughout the summer. Today, we're going to be talking about not donating your money to the AAMC. We're going to talk about what it means to be ready to apply. We're going to talk about the experiences of reapplicants. And I'm really privileged today because we have professionals as well as incoming med students that will be talking from both the professional side of like having experience with students and then from reapplicants as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let the members of my team who've been helping me with the pre-med Zoom parties introduce themselves first. Then I'll have Brielle introduce herself after that, and then we'll go on to our student panelists. So Fua, you can go first.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Afua D. I'm currently in the second gap year. I attended my first gap year this past year, and so now I'm just kind of bettering myself as a student in hopes of applying next cycle.
Hi, my name is Kayla Wade. I am in my 6th gap year after undergrad completion at UC Berkeley. I did my post-bac at Charles Drew, and I'm going to be in the Master's of Biomedical Science next fall in my 2nd reapplication cycle. I will also be in the chat answering questions you guys may have as they arrive. So if I can help you out, just put something in the chat.
Okay, now we're gonna have Brielle and then our student panelists.
All right, thank you, Sean. So I'm really excited to be here. I love doing this. I love doing events like this. So my name is Brielle. I'm a pre-health staff advisor at UC Davis, been doing this for a while, and now I'm the interim director of the Health Professions Post-Bac program at Davis. So if you need post-bac work, yes, Toby, good to see you. If you need post-bac work, send me an email at postbac@ucdavis.edu. We love to increase diversity, representation, all those things. So I'm just here to kind of tell you guys a little bit about why you should not donate your money to the AAMC and why they make so much money off of you doing so and preparing when you're not quite ready. So super happy to be here.
And then we could do Deja.
Hi everyone, my name is Deja. And I graduated from the University of Florida in 2018, and again from the University of South Florida College of Medicine in 2020, and I applied to medical school twice.
We go to Amanda.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Barber. I graduated from Towson University in 2015. I did a post-bac at Cornell, and then I just completed a master's at Mississippi College in fall of 2020. And I applied to medical school twice.
Oh, you're muted.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kalia Scheck-Snyder. I graduated from Louisiana State University in 2017 and went on to do a master's program at the University of South Florida Morsani College of Medicine in 2019. And I applied to medical school 3 times.
Thank you to our panelists. So Dr. Young should be joining us shortly. I think she's running late. So the first question, and the way I'm going to structure it is I'm going to ask directed questions towards Brielle versus our students. And if you guys have questions, please submit your questions to the Q&A, not the chat, so that way the team can capture them and make sure we don't miss any questions. So my first question is, Brielle, I can imagine that a lot of students apply to medical school when they are not ready or when their application is not the best version of themselves. In your professional opinion, what are some of the biggest mistakes that students make in applying that prevents them from getting in?
Yeah, great question. So biggest thing I can see normally is you're just applying because you feel like you should, right? You have yourself on a timeline based on everyone else, right? You see all your friends getting in before you see everyone moving on, right? And you're like, what about me? I need to just go ahead and apply and get my life started, right? Quickest way to get your money taken, right? is let me just apply because I want to get my life started. You are on your own journey, okay? It's not a race, it's a marathon. So it may not look like the person next to you and it's going to take time. You can see a lot of the students on here, it maybe took a couple times. That's fine. When you get into medical school, no one's going to ask you, well, how many times did it take you to get it? You're just going to be a doctor, right? So, and you're going to be a doctor for hopefully 30, 40 years after, right? So if you need a couple of years in the beginning to get it together, to kind of figure out what's the best plan of action, do that, because you'll save yourself a lot of money, because these applications are pretty expensive. So first thing I see is students taking the MCAT just to get a score. No, okay, you take the MCAT when you're ready. That is one of the hardest exams you will ever study for. I'm sure it'll, your step exams are hard as well and licensing, right? But the MCAT is a very different type of test, and it's not your traditional, I'm going to study really hard and I'm just going to get the answers right. They're testing different things that your brain is not quite used to. So that takes time. So I wouldn't take the MCAT just to get a score, just to be able to apply. Some schools actually really frown upon taking the MCAT 4 or 5 times, right? So after you've gotten maybe 2 low scores, even if you hit like a 510 or a 515 on that third one, even still, some schools are like, well, it took you 3 times to do that, right? So, and you don't want all of that hard work to be just diminished, right? Because you took it 3 times. And so the truth is, there are plenty of students who still get in after 3 or 4 attempts, right? So I'm not saying that that's not the case, but you can save yourself a lot of time and money by really waiting until you're consistently scoring where you want to be in your practice exams, right? So I always tell students, like, please try to take at least 8 to 9 full-length exams before taking the real test, right? I know that sounds like a lot, and that can also be somewhat expensive when you're trying to purchase those tests, but don't just take the exam, 2 times and okay, I did pretty well, I broke a 500, and then you get on the real thing, you're like, what happened? It went down 10 points, right? So take your time, take as many full-length exams as you need to really get consistent numbers above a 500. And, there are students that are the majority in medical school, right? Now we're talking about students of color, okay? You don't need a 520 to get into medical school, okay? You need to break that 500 barrier and have other aspects of your application that are strong, okay? So you're gonna see things on Student Doctor Network, you're gonna see things on Reddit that are gonna drive you insane and make you feel like you have to get the super high score. Yes, you should strive for the high score, right? But if you fall a little bit short of that, you're still over a 500. There are schools that are holistic and they're friendly and they'll really read your application carefully. So I would say that's a big thing, is making sure that you're taking the test when you're ready. My other biggest thing, please don't apply to random schools. Okay, all these schools have very unique focuses, and you may not notice it just based on their mission statement. Their mission statements, a lot of them actually sound kind of similar. You really have to take time. You have to really do a deep dive on their website. I even have students going on YouTube and watching like a day in the life of a student at UCLA or something, right? Like, talk to students who are there, talk to admissions committee members. You can reach out. You don't have to be silent during your application process. If you have questions, if you meet people at a conference, take down their information, follow up, right? Ask if you can speak to them throughout the process. But I would say that what's really important in terms of like picking your schools is making sure that you're applying to schools where you meet their mission. So for example, I have a lot of students that they really want to go to UCSF, okay? The UCSF is a really large research-based institution. So if you haven't done any research, right, it's a little bit harder to catch their eye, right? It's not that you're not a good applicant. Maybe you didn't like research. That's fine. You don't have to do research to get into medical school. But there are some schools that prefer that, right? And there's other schools that are more like focused on underserved communities and, you know, that type of work. So you just want to make sure you pick schools appropriately, because even if you're nowhere near their averages, that's okay. They're going to read your application holistically if you meet certain benchmarks, right? But picking the right schools is important. And one tool you can use, for those of you that are unfamiliar with MSAR, it's the medical school admissions requirements. I don't look at MSAR for metrics, because if you look on there, you're going to scream and you're going to think that you're never getting into medical school, because it looks like all the averages are super high and I'm never going to get in, right? But that's not what I use it for. There's a lot of other tools on MSAR, and one of them is this map. This map is amazing. You can look at this map and it'll show you, like, in the last 3 years, you know, what states were represented in the entering class of that school. If California, because I'm in California right now, if California was not on that list in the last 3 years, it's probably not going to be in this upcoming one, right? So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just like, you want to be mindful of those things, right? You don't want to apply to a school in Georgia and they only want students from Georgia who want to stay in Georgia. It's a waste of money, right? Don't donate your money because they want it, right? They're going to tell everyone to apply. They're going to say, yeah, you got a shot, apply, okay? But I want you all to be very mindful about where you're sending your money, because it really does matter. And then if you qualify for the fee assistance program, I know I'm throwing out a lot of stuff, Sean, I'm sorry. If you qualify for the fee assistance program, that gives you 20 free medical schools, okay? So see if you all qualify for that. The good thing about that is if you qualify, it also waives a lot of your secondary application fees as well. So you're gonna save a lot of money during the application cycle. Last thing, so I feel like I'm rambling. Last thing I'll probably say is you really want to know the value that you bring. Okay, I hate to say this, but as a Black student, right? Yes, you are important. Yes, we need you in medicine, but that is not enough to the medical schools to just give you a pass to walk in. Okay, if your grades do not have an upward trend, or if they don't have some indication that you can handle the rigor of medical school, they're not going to admit you. It's not because you're not a good person. It's not because you're not passionate. But if they were to admit you and you're not ready, and then you drop out the first year, that affects their attrition rates, and medical schools get funded based on their attrition rates. So they're not trying to admit too many people that they don't think are going to actually make it. Okay. So you want to show them, you want to prove to them, no, I can handle the rigor when I get there. That may be a post-bac program. That may be a master's degree. That may be just your last year of undergrad. But when you're trying to articulate the value that you bring to medicine, you have to give them a reason to want to pick you. In your personal statement, just saying that you're passionate about medicine and telling a journey story about how you got here, everyone does that, right? So we're trying to figure out, how can we be different? Well, the only way you can be different is actually telling them, here's how I plan to implement blank, or as a future provider, I seek to do blank. They want action. They want to know, if they admit you, what are you going to do when you get here? Are you going to hit the ground running? Or are you going to just kind of be passively going through your medical career, right? So that's what we do at Davis. We're always having workshops on, what value do you bring? Why do they need you? Because if they don't need you, or if they don't feel like they need you, all they're going to do is take your money and tell you to apply again next year. So that's kind of what this workshop is about. I don't want to keep going on and on, but.
Yeah, thank you, Brielle. So you brought up some points that I want to ask follow-up questions on. Yeah. So I think the first one was regarding grades. So for people, there's multiple reasons why people reapply. We know that. And grades seem to be a huge thing. And I think in my experience mentoring other people, and you had mentioned it too, they want to see that upward trend, right? So I can share a bit about myself. I made the decision not to do a post-bac or a master's program. And kind of halfway in my college career, I said, if you don't get your grades up, girl, we're going to have to find money from somewhere to pay. And I didn't have money for a post-bac. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to make senior year the most amazing year ever. And I was able to get away with, overall lower GPA, but my senior was incredible. Now I have a question. How should students know whether they should take a post-bac versus an SMP, or if like their senior year is enough of an upward trend? Like how can they parse out, have I proven enough that am academically ready?
Great question. So I want to say there is not necessarily a one size fit all. Different things work for different people. However, I would say if you've established a trend that's 2 to 3 quarters, preferably 3 quarters of mostly A's, you can have a B or 2 sprinkled in there, but try to avoid C's, right? Mostly A's in the last 3 quarters or the last 2 semesters. That's enough for medical schools to see a trend. Okay. Now, I will say this. There are students who get into medical school who have below a 3.0 cumulative GPA and below a 3.0 science GPA, but it is rare nowadays. It gets more and more competitive each year. So I would say try to do yourself a good thing by trying to get that science GPA, specifically that BCPM GPA. Try to get that to a 3.0 if you can. There are so many schools nowadays that are really just screening you out. If you don't hit the 3.0, they're screening you out. So for some students, you may be 2 years away from a 3.0 science GPA based on where you're currently sitting. That's okay. If you need to do extra classes, now to Sean's point, it's expensive. Post-bac work is not cheap, and it's not, the hardest part about it is that it's not undergrad, but it's not grad school. So there's no actual funding source for students who want to do post-bac. Either you're funding it via private loans, you're funding it via yourself, right? Or family or something like that. You may get a scholarship here, maybe not. But if you're young enough in your academic career to still fix your trend, kind of like what Sean was talking about, a solid year really is good. It's substantial. But if you're below a 3.0 science GPA, that's when things do get tricky. So let's talk about when to take a post-bac versus like a master's program. So if you're below a 3.0 cumulative and science GPA, post-bac makes a little bit more sense because they're actually focusing on your undergrad grades as it pertains to medical school. Now, you would do a master's degree if, let's say, you might have a 3.1 or a 3.2. Not the most shabby thing in the world, but decent enough to probably get into medical school. But maybe you just have other aspects of your application that need some work, or you wanted to kind of show them a better trend. You can do like a master's in biomedical sciences. It looks really good, right? They're not going to just use that GPA. They're still looking at your undergrad GPA, but it is a way to enhance your application overall, especially if you have an interest in something, right? Like maybe you're just really interested in something that master's degree is offering, and that's going to help you articulate the value that you bring to medicine, right? So those are different ways to kind of go about it. But with my students, I usually say, if you're in the 3.1 or 3.2, let's consider special master's program, sorry. If you're below that 3.0, science GPA, cumulative GPA, I tend to have them focus on post-bacs because I don't want them to get screened out of that 3.0 cutoff. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Afua?
Yes. So for the next question, it's how difficult was it to reapply to medical school? How were you feeling during the time? Because it's obvious how scary or nerve-wracking it may be to having to reapply. So if you guys can share your opinions on how that was for you.
I can start. I would say I definitely was more motivated and felt more competitive the second time. After having done the master's program, I was still doing the master's program at the time that I reapplied, but I had retaken the MCAT, improved my score, and I was definitely feeling more so not defeated from the last application, but more so encouraged and ready to attack this application cycle in hopes of getting in. So for anybody who has to reapply, just keep a positive attitude about it, and definitely reapply when you're ready. That's what the first time I was like, ooh, I really hope somebody will, take me, see what I did. And I'm sure a school could have, but the second time I was actually ready and felt confident in myself and in my application. So that's what I would say.
I would definitely agree with what Amanda said. The first time I applied was in the 2017-2018 cycle, so to matriculate in 2018, when I wouldn't have had a gap year going from undergrad. And at that time, I scored really bad on the MCAT, so I retook my MCAT, and that's where I put the most pressure on myself, is making sure I scored higher, because if you didn't see the flyer, I took the MCAT 3 times, and on my second time, I actually dropped. So the third time I told myself, this is it. I'm not spending no more money to the AAMC. Like, I have to do this. And so I did a master's program, not because my GPA was low, but I needed help, like, trying to apply the material. Like, I paid for a tutor, wasn't working. And so the master's program and the test style that they used actually helped me apply the material to questions, which were kind of similar to the MCAT. So that's how I was able to improve my score, which also doing well in the master's program and doing well on the MCAT also gave me more self-confidence. And again, it's all about mindset, going in confident, knowing that you are going to become a doctor someday, and just put your best foot forward.
Yeah, I would say that reapplying like I mentioned before, I applied to medical school 3 times. The first time I reapplied, I actually was a nervous wreck. And that first no kind of broke me down. So after my first time reapplying, I was pulling for anything. I didn't really completely figure out how to apply at that moment too. So things like this are really good, because a big part of the application is just knowing what you're doing on the application and how to answer the questions and how to function through just all the different aspects of the application. I would definitely say that my second time reapplying put a fire under me, and I started reaching out for help. I found an advisor that really helped me. So I would definitely say it was intimidating and reapplying the first time, but once you get the help that you need, reapplying, you feel like a totally different person. I was a lot more confident. And I knew at that time, I was like, this is my year. So definitely, if you're struggling with the whole reapplication process, keep going, because it honestly gets better.
Thank you. So kind of some of you guys mentioned it, and Brielle kind of talked about from her opinion, from her like professional experience, when to do a master's versus post-bac. I know a couple of you guys either did a master's, post-bac, or both. Can you walk us through your thought process of why you chose one over the other, or why you did both?
I can start. So I chose the master's program. I did the MSP3 program at USF. And like I said, it wasn't because my GPA needed help. It was because I was struggling with the MCAT. And so I looked for programs that would specifically have classes that reflected the first year of medical school. And I knew that more medical schools ask application-based questions. And so that's the reason why I chose the MS-P3 or a special master's program, and also for science letters. I know they say as like non-traditional students, they don't focus on science letters, but I didn't have any advisors or mentors to tell me in a panic for science letters. I didn't want to go back to undergrad. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this program. It'll help me strengthen my confidence in MCAT material and also get science letters of recs, and it worked out for both ways.
I did a post-bac and a master's, and the reason why I did the master's after having done the post-bac was because it was actually recommended to me by an admissions person at my top choice school. So after I had applied the first time and had done the post-bac, I reached out to her. I was in contact with her while applying, but I could have asked some probably better questions to potentially not even apply that first time. But I talked to her, and she basically suggested either retake the MCAT and get such and such score, or do a specific master's program. So I just went with that second option, headed to the master's program, and then also retook the MCAT. So that's why I ended up doing a second master's. I was definitely skeptical about doing a second program after having done a post-bac. I thought that schools would look down on that. But because I was able to have an upward trend starting from undergrad to the post-bac to then the master's, I think that the continued upward trend showed growth. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. So that's why I did too.
So I also did the MSP3 program at the University of South Florida. And the real reason why I decided to do the master's program was kind of what I mentioned earlier about confidence. So like I said, when I was reapplying, I didn't really know where to go. So, and then also like Deja said, my GPA wasn't really the problem, my MCAT was. And I feel that with me doing the master's program, it built my confidence up. I felt a lot more comfortable about applying, not even applying to medical school, but even eventually becoming a medical student, knowing that I could handle it. So that's the main reason why I decided to do the master's program. And with the MSP3 program, since it put you at the medical school, so you were taught by medical school professors. So it definitely helped me to show myself that this was the path for me still.
Thank you. So I have another question that I think is going to apply to both Brielle and the panelists. This question is, so on Brielle's side, the question is going to be, when a student comes into your office and is like, Brielle, girl, I want to apply. And you look at their data, you look at everything, and you're like, baby, you're not ready. How do you have that honest conversation with them in a way that doesn't defeat them? Because as we know, and this is, I guess, a follow-up question, students have pre-med advisors that will say, oh, this is not going to work out for you, try something else. So how do you have an honest conversation with those students while still encouraging them that they can still do this?
Yeah, awesome. I get this question all the time. So I'm always, trying to tell students, like, it's never been a matter of if you're going to be a doctor. It's always been when, right? So we always do that. It's if, it's not when. So if we're looking at what you have now, I'll ask them, do you consider this to be the best version of you? Do you consider this to be the most competitive application that you can actually submit? Or do you think that there are other things we can add to this or enhance to make it better? 9 times out of 10, they'll say, I know I can make it better. I just don't want to keep waiting, right? Like, I need to get my life started. I want to have kids, all these things. So we're always having these conversations. But, when it comes to medicine, I just want to briefly talk about children for a second. When it comes to medicine, you can make time for a family, okay? There are medical students that get married, they have families, right? Like, you make time for what you want in life. So I don't want anyone to feel like medicine is going to stop you from living your life. It won't. You just have to make time for it. But anyway, going back to that difficult conversation, it's really a matter of me understanding what it's like. So for those of you who don't know, I was pre-med too. I just knew I was going to be a doctor, right? And then I kind of went through this whole journey, took the MCAT, did it all, but still knew I had a passion more so for students. I know I didn't really like patients like that, but I just felt like being a Black female physician was just so powerful, right? And it is. However, I realized that I have a little bit more of a knack for helping everyone else get there. Okay, so there's not enough advisors who really understand the experience of a Black student pursuing medicine, right? And I had a unique experience of knowing that. And so I felt like I was going to be more effective in a career doing something like this. So with that being said, I word things very carefully. I make sure I'm more gentle with what I say, understanding that most students are in a place of defeat already before they even come to me. Someone's already told them they can't do it. Someone's already told them the 1 C they got is going to stop them from becoming a doctor, or that they'll never get enough experience, right? All these different things. So what we do is, I have them list out everything that they want to put into an application. And then I'll also show them some of my successful students, right? And I'll say, okay, here's kind of what a little bit more of a competitive edge looks like. Do you feel like you're there yet? Or do we feel like we need a little bit more time? And I'll kind of walk them through that and help them through that. And we'll just adjust timelines. I always tell students, like, try to let go of that grip of that timeline in your head. That timeline is toxic. Toxic timelines are a real thing, okay? So, you know, you have to give yourself the time that you need to be competitive. But those conversations are difficult, and, you know, they're different depending on the student, but I'd say more often than not, I can convince someone to kind of pause for a little bit, let's regroup and actually submit the right one. However, I do have students that say, no, Brielle, I'm not doing it. I'm going to submit my application. And I still support them. I help them all the way through, because you never know, right? That student could have gotten in. I gave them my professional opinion, right? But I'm backing them 100%, right? So that's kind of my philosophy on things. And I'll walk them through, as negative things may happen in the cycle, I'll tell them why that happened based on what we had talked about previously before you applied. Then they'll say, oh, okay. So if I do this next year, now I get what's going on. So some people actually have to go through it and learn. And that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying, I'm not saying to do it, but I'm just saying some people have to learn the hard way, and it's okay. You know, there's a lesson in everything.
Thank you. And this question is going to go towards you, Brielle, as well as the panelists. So I guess the first question is, from your opinion, is it actually harder to get into medical school as a reapplicant?
It's not. 70% of applicants are reapplicants. So it's not as big of a deal as people make it seem. Now, I'm not saying that so that you can go ahead and submit your application, get rejected, then have to do it again. That's not why I'm saying it. What I'm saying it is because there are tons of people applying to medical school, right? There is never going to be enough spots for everyone that applies to medical school. So sometimes, even when you have a really great application, sometimes it still doesn't work out, right? So you can't always say that you made this huge mistake the first time. Sometimes it's just, you know, the people chose who they chose, and you were kind of the ones that didn't get picked that year. It's okay. It doesn't mean anything about you as a person. But there are some adjustments that we need to make. But when you're submitting your reapplication or your new application, things do need to change. So you can't just submit the same application you submitted the first time, right? Like, there's got to be some growth. There's got to be something different. Maybe there's a different spin on your personal statement. Maybe you got some new experience, new letters of rec, something. But I wouldn't discourage you from reapplying just because you didn't get in the first time. There are always little things we can tweak and kind of work on. So but no, it's not going to put you at a dramatic disadvantage. Most applicants are reapplicants.
Thank you. With following up that question, I'd like to hear from our panelists. I mean, we kind of touched upon it, but apart from the grade or the MCAT, what other major changes did you make in your application compared to the times you unsuccessfully got in to the times you successfully got in?
So I would say that a big difference was, like I was mentioning earlier, was just how I filled out the application itself. I did realize after talking to an advisor that the first application I ever submitted to medical school should not have been submitted to medical school. And I don't even mean that just in regards to my GPA or my MCAT. Really working on my personal statement and my activities. And I actually just mentioned this in one of the questions that someone asked under the Q&A of showing, not telling. So the first time that I applied to medical school, I did on my activity section, it was a lot of, I did this, I worked as a medical scribe, I did this in the office, and that's all fine and good. You know, you want to tell them what you did, but at the same time, what they really want to know in those sections is, how is that going to apply to you as a medical student in the future and as a physician in the future? So it was really me taking that extra time to really work on my activities and personal statement and showing them that through this experience, this is what I learned. This is how it will help me to be a good medical student and an even better physician. So that's one of the biggest changes that I made in my application process. And then also one thing that's really important that I did was applying way earlier. The first 2 times I applied, actually, I was way behind the marks of like when I should have been applying. And I definitely think that me applying earlier contributed to my success this cycle.
Thankfully the master's that I went to had some opportunities that I was able to get involved in to kind of further my application. That was not the intention of the master's, as I did already have a good amount of clinical experiences and things like that. But I did add those to my activity section. I did rework the personal statement. I did answer a question where somebody had asked about the personal statement. And initially I was not planning to rework it, and I really didn't make a whole lot of changes to the body of it, as much had not changed, but I do think it is important to make changes to the statement as you see fit and not just submit the exact same statement. Additionally, I did add some letters of recommendation from the masters that I attended, and I think that's about it. But overall, it was mostly the MCAT and the GPA. But there are definitely ways that you should change the application and besides the MCAT and GPA, even if that was your main focus in needing to reapply.
For my reapplication, I improved my writing. When I looked at my previous application, I left so many characters unused that I don't know why no one ever said anything, but I definitely made sure to write and show, not tell, what each experience was about. And I also chose more meaningful ones. I think the first time I applied, or listed more than just most meaningful. The first time I applied, I only listed 7 activities. The second time I applied, I listed 14 because not everything related to medicine or things that are outside of medicine still can go on the application. Matter of fact, most of my interviews were about things on my application that weren't related to medicine, such as I was a high school athlete. All my interviews asked about basketball. And I ended up listing that on my activity section as my hobby that I've been doing for more than 10 years, and everyone wanted to know more. So that's definitely something that I did to improve my application. And I agree, I think my letters were stronger this time because being that I wrote more or about things other than medicine, I included those letters. So some of my volunteers that's not related to medicine. So my family and I, we go out and do feed the homeless a lot. And so I had my the organizer of the city where we go, because we organize events through the city, they wrote me a letter, and it wasn't related to medicine, but they could speak to my leadership on top of my science letters. And then I did have letters from physicians that I shadowed and physicians that I worked with. So I think my letters were stronger as well.
If I could just, I'm sorry. If I could just piggyback one thing, I would just like to say, I also think it's important to highlight things outside of medicine. So I was a college Division I athlete. And so, yes, this was already included in my first application. But when I changed my personal statement, I added a theme, and it kind of surrounded, it was about the sport that I did in college. And so that definitely came up in a lot of my in some of my interviews. So definitely don't focus on, everything does not have to be medical. You do need to have some clinical experiences because that's kind of the whole purpose of wanting to be a doctor. But just put everything in there that means a lot to you, and the medical schools will see that and want to talk to you about it.
Thank you. I have another question for Brielle, and then I'm going to hand it over to Afua to ask the rest of our questions. And maybe our panelists can answer this as well. I've heard of some offices reaching out to medical schools on their students' behalf, this concept of advocating for yourself through the process, emailing, calling. What is your advice or approach to advocating for yourself throughout the cycle? What is appropriate type of advocacy? What is inappropriate type of advocacy? Especially if you're concerned that there's some red flag or you may get screened out or something.
Yeah, great question. So when it comes to communicating, you should absolutely advocate for yourself throughout this entire process. Now we'll kind of talk about what's too much, but in general, an applicant that stays really silent throughout the whole process, you could have actually gotten more interviews, you could have you could have gotten a lot more had you kind of known when to say something and when to not. I know that's kind of tough, but so there's two types of things, right? So we have update letters. So let's say that you've accumulated a new experience and you want the admissions team to know, hey, I got this new thing going on and here's how I think it's going to add value to me as a future provider. You can either upload it through their actual school portal, because sometimes there's like an update portal, or you can just email the admissions team directly and say, hey, here's an update that I have. Once you've sent that update once, you don't need to keep sending that same update. They got it the first time, just trust that they got that. Now, let's say you've gotten an interview, but you're waiting to hear back on whether or not you've been accepted. You can send a letter of intent, which is basically saying, you know what, if given the opportunity to attend this school, I'm coming, right? And here are all the reasons why. Here's why I'm a great fit for your mission. Here's why I resonate with the student body. Here's all these things, right? So the best two things to send are update letters, and then after you've been given an interview, a letter of intent. Now, let's say it's been a long time, okay? You haven't gotten an interview. Now we're talking about, we're in February of the next year. You sent one update, maybe a couple months into the cycle. You can still ask a question. If you just have a quick question for an admissions person, you can still reach out and say, hey, I'm just checking in, seeing how things are going, right? Especially if you've met someone at like a conference. That is my biggest advice. If you meet a representative somewhere, you can reach out and ask them and tell them, my application has been submitted. I've been waiting to hear back. I did send an update, but I just wanted to update you as well, right, on some things that are going on. The biggest thing I would just say is don't email people every week, every month, right? Take your time, like have it spread out, like maybe once every 2 months. Now, this is the part that's really important. When it comes to money, yes, I need you to be a little bit more adamant when it comes to like trying to advocate for your financial package, because once you've been accepted into a school, most schools are not just going to offer you a whole bunch of aid. They'll offer you some, but they're never going to offer you all that they actually have available to you. You actually have to ask for it. So if you've been admitted into 2 different schools, you can go to the first school and say, hey, this school has offered me a $20,000 scholarship. I'm wondering if you could match or exceed that so I can make the best financial decision for myself. And they may come back and say, hey, we can give you 30. Okay, you're like, okay, great. Go back to that first school and say, hey, this school is giving me 30. I'm wondering if you can match or exceed that, or if there's any more funding you can secure on my behalf, because I'm really trying to go somewhere that makes the most sense for me and my family's financial situation. You do that until hopefully you get yourself a full ride somewhere. Sometimes you got to play it back and forth, but with those, try to work with an advisor who has experience with that so that they can kind of help you navigate it. But that's the time where it's okay to send frequent emails. But you don't want to be like too annoying in the beginning, right? One update's good. Maybe a few months have gone by. Just ring the doorbell. Hey, I'm still here. I want to be at your school. Don't forget me, right? Keep it simple, keep it sweet. But then the letters of intent, those are important for schools you really want to go to. Now, you can't send a letter of intent to 20 schools, okay? Because at some point, someone's going to figure that out and you don't want that. But, you can send a letter of intent to a couple. I mean, one is best, right? But sometimes it's like 2 or 3, depending on the schools. But I really just encourage you all, try to find an advisor that you can work really closely with, because it's really hard to kind of navigate this alone. And if you don't have an advisor, reach out to friends that have done it before you, that were successful, come to panels like this, keep coming to all of Sean's events. She's clearly giving you all the game. So, just keep doing those things, but stay connected to a community that wants to see you win. There are so many people that don't want to see you win. So, that's what I was saying. Reddit, Student Doctor Network, those have purposes, but not really to be reading all day long, stressing yourself out, comparing yourself to those students. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and jump in and ask the next question. So this question is geared towards Brielle, but any of the student panelists can go ahead and also offer their opinion. When applying to schools, should you limit the amount of schools that you apply to, like based off of like averages? And also for the student panelists, can you please, if you decide to speak on this question, include how many schools you applied to, and if you reapplied, when you did reapply to the schools?
Okay, I'll just answer that first part quickly. So truthfully, one individual person is probably only a really good fit for about 25 to 30 schools. You're not going to be a good fit for all of the medical schools. So I usually have my students apply to somewhere between 20 to 30 schools, which is expensive, but that's a pretty healthy number typically. And one piece of advice I have is when you're applying to schools, you don't have to add all 20 to 30 schools up front when you first submit. If you just need to get verified, right? Verification is extremely important. Apply early, hopefully in the month of June, does not have to be the first day, but sometime in the month of June. And even if you're just getting verified for one school, and I have students do this who maybe they haven't received their MCAT score yet, so they're not quite sure what it's gonna be, apply to a school you could care less about. And that way you're only a reapplicant, right? If you don't like your score to that one school, right? So just submit the app. And I have students add schools in waves. I don't have you apply to all 30 because what happens is you're going to get 30 secondaries. All these secondaries have time frames, right? If you're submitting secondaries a month or 2 months out, that school feels like maybe you didn't really want to be here. You really do want to get your secondaries in a healthy amount of time, 2 to 3 weeks, hopefully. So add 5 to 10 schools, tackle those secondaries, then add a few more. It's not going to be a huge difference in terms of when they receive your stuff. And if you can, submit better secondaries, that works better for you too. So I'll stop talking. I'll let the panelists.
If we could just have one of you guys speak on this, and then we can jump to the next question.
So I applied, I was also given the advice to apply to at least around 20 schools. Unfortunately, this past year was a struggle. So I applied to about 8 schools, but I was very strategic about where I applied. And I applied to schools that I knew I would probably have a good shot at. Whether it be, especially as a reapplicant, there was one school in particular that I actually spoke to the dean of admissions after I did not get accepted the first time. And he went over my application with me and kind of gave me kind of tips of like, if you do this, this, and this, you should be good. So I did that and here we are. But yeah, so with reapplying to schools, I follow the advice to try and apply to as many as you can, but also you have to be a little picky. Don't apply to schools that you don't want to go to, because that might be the one school that you get into, and that's going to be that.
So you mentioned something that's actually pretty important, which actually is a great segue to my last question. And that is, for the schools that you didn't get into, did you end up reaching out and asking what you lacked or why you didn't get in?
Okay, so yeah, so like I mentioned, there was one school that I really wanted to go to that I did not get in. And I had a feeling that it had something to do with my MCAT, but you can never be too sure. So I decided to reach out anyway. And the dean actually went ahead, he set up a meeting with me. I went into his office, and we worked out what it is I needed to do, and I did that. As far as other schools, I didn't really do it to many schools, just because, like I said, I knew what things I needed to work on. But even if you have an idea of why you didn't get in, it's still a good idea. If it's schools that you really want to go to, I would definitely reach out, because it not only shows that you really want to go to that school, it also it's going to be helpful for you overall, even for other schools in general. Just the whole application process of knowing exactly, okay, this is what these admission committees are looking for, kind of giving you a better idea of where you went wrong in the process.
And can I quickly add to that? Sorry. If you have kind of what we were talking about earlier, if you're one of the students like the ones that I love, where they have to apply, right? They just have to do it. They have to see what happens. It's okay. in terms of just making sure that you get the feedback from the schools. It's not just me telling you why it didn't work out. You need them to also confirm for you this is what they're looking for. And it's not to be mean, right? Again, they need to know that you can handle the rigor before you get in there. So communicating with admissions teams is a skill that I want all of you to work on, get comfortable with. Networking is important. It's not that you necessarily have to network your way in, but you need to be likable. Like you need to be someone that they enjoy talking to. If you're reaching out and you're kind of grumpy and you're like, well, why didn't I get in? And like, I know I'm passionate and you're just not seeing it, right? That is a one-way ticket to really not getting in the next year, right? So they will remember, they will write your name down and be like, I don't want this student in my school. So just make sure you're approaching them kindly, okay? These people are busy. You know, there's maybe 20 to 25 screeners at every medical school reading hundreds, thousands of applications, okay? They're tired. So just be a little, you know, try to be as kind as you can and keep that in mind. Those conversations matter.
And I just wanted to add one quick thing based off of what Brielle just said. So the dean that I met with, there was a switch up on my interview day for that school, and he ended up having to interview me, and he remembered me. And he basically in my interview told me, you did what I told you to do. And I felt good after that. And then here I am. So like Brielle said, like make those connections early, and because you never know where they'll take you.
If I can piggyback off of that, I can't speak to like not making connections because I did do that. So of course you can get into school without, you know, making connections with people in admissions. But I would say that if you feel like you have lower stats or something that may not be what everybody thinks is like what, you know, everybody gets in with, that could be another way to either see what you need to do before applying or somehow enhance your application because you've made a connection with the school personally. So you don't have to speak necessarily to the dean. You can speak to somebody, whether that's the dean of diversity. That was actually who I was in contact with, both when I applied the first time and after. So it doesn't have to be the dean. It can be anybody in the school who's willing to help you in whatever way that you need help.
And just a quick final tip, yes, to Amanda, if you can get in contact with a dean of diversity or a director of diversity or something, reach out to them very early. Let them know you're applying because it's actually their job to help diversify the school. So if they know that you're coming in, that's a really good thing for them to be aware of. So thanks for.
Thank you. So we have like 5-ish minutes left, so I'm going to have to really be stingy about the Q&A questions, but our panelists will leave their contact. Regard to the network thing, for those who didn't network, I was one of those people who I actually didn't really know anyone when I was applying, so I just submitted my applications and I prayed to God and I said, Jesus, touch their hearts, and the Lord listened. So I'm an example of someone who didn't really know anyone or network, and I just submitted my application. So either or I think can work for you. One of the biggest questions that's been coming up is, let me see, I'm trying to scroll through here, is when is it, I think Brielle had mentioned early or applying late. A lot of people want to know, in your opinion, what is too late to apply in the cycle, or what is considered early or intermediate? And can you kind of map out to us what do you think is appropriate or most competitive? Maybe that's the correct word.
Yeah, so June I'd say is early. July is on time. August, like the first half of August, we're still kind of on time, but now we're getting a little bit behind the curve, okay? Now, some students, though, they don't start studying for their MCAT until June. So they study from like June through September, take a September test, and hoping that their score is good, they'll submit in September. I don't recommend that, but it does happen sometimes for students if they scored really well on the MCAT. If the MCAT score was kind of subpar, I would still say September is late. Now, have I seen students get in September? Absolutely. But would I recommend it? No. And the reason why is I want you all to think about this, about how they frame their class. So you want to be who they shape the class based on. You don't want to be the application that comes after they've shaped their class and they're trying to see, do you fit that mold? Because every class is slightly different. So I would want to be someone, okay, I got in early, and now they're trying to see who are these other students that are going to come in and mesh well with me. Okay, that's where you want to be. So in the month of June, I would say it's good. July is still on time. So anytime in those 2 months, I'd say you're doing pretty good. But if it's, late August, September, I would say it might make sense to wait till the following cycle, especially if you don't have the most competitive metrics, right? So.
Thank you. The next question that I see come up is, I think this might be more geared towards Brielle, because I'm sure you had experience with this, and maybe you guys as well too. Actually, so maybe it goes to everyone. A lot of students are struggling with clinical experience and really building their resume during this time, and they're just kind of curious, like, what other ways can they make the application competitive if they can't do stuff, I guess.
Yeah, so, definitely a popular question right now. There are things like virtual shadowing. If there are things related to COVID-19 where they need someone to be like a contact tracer, that's still someone in the clinical realm. I actually encourage a lot of my students to do like out of the box stuff. So like we have like a YOLO hospice center out here. No one really likes to go to hospice because it's kind of sad, but there are a lot of patients who would just love someone to talk to as they're transitioning. So I always encourage students, like, pick activities that you actually want to do. Like, don't pick things that you think sound good or you think that the admissions teams want to see. They are actually interested in what you're interested in. So if you really want to do something and you like it, and you can articulate why that brings value to you and why that's going to make you valuable moving forward, then do those things. But right now it is tough in the pandemic. So I just encourage most people to try to find either remote things or be really adamant about cold calling, which is basically you go on Google, you say, okay, for a hypothetical situation, maybe I want to be a pediatrician. So I'm going to type in pediatricians near me. I'm going to put in like all the neighboring cities. I literally would just call the front office and say, hey, I'm a current UC Davis undergrad. I'm looking for an opportunity to come in and shadow. Do you happen to have a physician that might be willing to do so? If they say no, you can say no problem. Maybe is there anyone else you could refer me to? And if they say no, okay, no problem, thanks. Move on to the next phone number. It does take a lot of effort on your part to put yourself out there, but I do have a lot of students that are making it work. They're finding things to do, but they're not gonna like fall in your lap. These experiences you do kind of have to work for a little bit, or if you want to become an EMT, CNA, more of those certification things, those tend to be a little bit more open, at least out here in California. I'm not sure what it's like on the East Coast, but I would say the virtual things, though, virtual shadowing, stuff like that is good.
Thank you. This question is more geared towards our student panelists. Because you guys are all reapplicants, did you address being a reapplicant in your personal statement? Did it come up in your interviews? If so, how did you navigate that?
At one point I did, in one of the drafts, have a line about that in the conclusion, but I decided to take it out because I wanted the conclusion to end strong and not necessarily with the thought of me being a reapplicant, especially because I was not a reapplicant to every school that I applied to the second time around. So I'm not sure. You probably could put it in there, but I chose to not do that for that reason. I didn't have it in any activities, I don't believe, but I did structure the statement to the personal statement to where I believed it showed growth, but not necessarily just focusing on that piece about being a reapplicant, if that makes sense.
I would say I focused on that type of stuff more in my secondaries, just because sometimes they even have questions related to reapplying and ways that you improved or struggles that you had. So in my primary application, I tried to focus more on, more of like the positives and things that I did. And then once I got to the next part and getting my secondaries, that's kind of where I elaborated more on the rest of my journey.
I second that. I did that also.
Me as well.
Thank you. So the last question, and while I ask this last question, if our panelists can go ahead and put your contact information and make sure it says to panelists and attendees, because a lot of them have been asking about your contact information in the Q&A. But the last question I have for both Brielle and our panelists is, because all of you guys either did a post-bac or a master's or spent time out of undergrad. So for non-traditional students or students who may not necessarily have access to resources, how did you guys navigate that? Or how did you guys get the help you need for your application cycle? And more geared towards Brielle, for students who struggle to find a supportive pre-med advisor like yourself, because not everyone is blessed to have you in their corner, what is your advice for them of how to navigate that and get the help that they need to go through the process?
Yes. So for the students, first I want to say with Davis, if you go on our website, which I'll put in the chat, our workshops are virtual. They're open to anyone. So you can get all the information that I give out and our team gives out for free. That's just on there. The Zoom links are directly on the website, and there's a calendar where you can see what event or what we're talking about each day of the week. And we have a ton of events. So that's helpful. Eventually, I'm going to start something small. I get a lot of students asking me to do advising outside of Davis. So I'm going to start something eventually. It hasn't happened yet, but when it happens, I will get in contact with Sean and I'll get everyone's email and I'll do that. I want to start opening it up for like Saturdays and Sundays, because I know there's a lot of other students that need help besides Davis. But aside from that, first I would say, think about who your undergrad institution was and see if they have a pre-health advising department. It's usually very small. It's not the most noticeable department oftentimes, and it's usually hidden in like the internship and career center or something like that. So see if you can find that, and see if you can find an advisor that still works with alumni if you've already graduated. There are a lot of very high priced consultants out there, which I would say be careful of. Just make sure it's someone you trust, you value their opinion, but just be a little bit careful with some of that stuff, because I've had students pay $2,000 for personal statement help, and I read it and I'm like, we could have done this for free. It would have been better. Don't do that, So just be careful. If someone is like overcharging you, like if you're seeing prices like $500 an hour, $600 an hour, like that's a lot. You can probably find things much, much cheaper in other places. So yeah, I would say reach out to your health professions advising department and be careful how that advisor makes you feel. If you're getting vibes like they're somewhat condescending, they're giving you negative energy, abort ship. It's fine. Look for someone else. You need people that are going to support you. But I'll put my email in the chat, and I answer questions as often as I can. I do get a lot, but I'll do my best to get to them, especially if they're just like quick questions about the cycle. I'm always down to answer any of that type of stuff. But if you wanted someone to kind of walk through personal statement, walk through experiences, secondaries, all that type of stuff, like I said, I'll be starting something eventually, but hopefully by the end of this year, I'll get something up and running.
Yes, girl. The moment you start your side hustle consulting company, you already know I'm gonna send everybody your way.
Okay. Oh, and lastly, keep watching Sean's events. People like her, I'm telling you, you all are so blessed to be in a space now where we have so many people who look like us wanting to give back to people like us, right? You don't see that very often. So any event that she has, know that she's put in work to get these panelists, and she's blood, sweat, and tears, okay? And I'm telling you, it's gonna be good content. So find people, other people as well, like Sean, who are also giving encouraging things. But nowadays on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, I mean, you can find a lot of encouraging things. You just kind of have to seek it out. So Sean speaks. I'm telling you, that's my answer for that one. So.
Yeah, I had in undergrad, I did not have a great advisor. So I was very lost in the process, and I wish I would have had things like this to help me along the way, because I feel like maybe I wouldn't have had to take as many gap years as I did. But I will say that once you do get a good advisor, it changes everything completely, because like I said, the first 2 times I applied, I was lost. And then once I found a good advisor and someone to really help me through the process and explain it in a way that you're not gonna find trying to Google it on the internet, it changes everything. So do try and find, if you are struggling a little bit, try and find someone to help you. There are people out there to help you.
Thank you. Our time is fast spent. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Our panelists are going to drop their either Instagram or their email in the chat one more time for all of you guys. I just want to say a huge thank you first to Brielle. For those, most of you guys don't know, but Brielle is the reason the girls is not paying for medical school right now, literally. I remember around maybe last month, April, May, this time last year, I was texting her. She was telling me, go ask them for more money, go bother them. So Brielle, she's a real one, and I knew I had to have her on this session because she is not going to stray the girls away. And I want to thank all my student panelists for coming on here, being authentic, being vulnerable, and sharing your story with us. It's super appreciated. You guys, I've tagged their Instagrams on the student panelists on Instagram. So in case you don't catch it here, you can connect with them. Brielle has dropped her email. Thank you all so much for coming. If you missed parts of it, this is going to be on YouTube, I think tomorrow, maybe. No promises. The girls got a lot of things going on, but it will be for you guys to watch later. Thank you guys so much. On Friday, our next session is going to be making the most of your gap years. We're going to have people who took some gap years come on, talk about what they did in their gap years, why they took gap years. So definitely come out if you're thinking about a gap year or if you're in your gap year. Thank you guys so much and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.